YouTubers may not be able to make their January ad revenue go up, but we can make the price of cars go up. Here are 5 cars that YouTubers inflated, whether it was me, Doug, Demuro, Scotty, Kilmer, whatever, you get the point. Anyways, I'll only be talking about United States prices for reference. So the first car we're going to talk about is the Ford Crown Victoria. Formerly could be found from anywhere from $500 to $1,500, the car is now averaging for around $3,800. Now, this doesn't seem like a massive price range increase, but for the target audience it once served, this is a devastating effect. For people who looked for a turnkey car, who are just at the worst situation of their lives, the Crown Victoria was there for them. Now you're probably wondering, how did the Crown Victoria get so cheap in the first place? And it's mostly because of auctions, especially auctions done by local police stations or taxi companies where they just had to quickly liquidate their cars to make money for new ones. And also, people who eventually get these cars had no clue how reliable they were at the time. In hindsight, we can see how reliable they are now that it's been several decades with these cars, but you have to remember at the time, people just thought of them as Fords. So when their Ford started going to 100,000, 200,000, even 300,000 miles, they had this aching thought in the back of their head like, oh, it's gonna explode at any moment now, this car is only worth $500 at most. And because of that, that's why they were just completely shoveled out at such cheap prices. Once we started to realize, wait a second, these cars are actually pretty good, that's when people started realizing, oh, they can hold on to their cars, even the 200,000 mile ones, and price them for $4,000, which is what's going on right now. The Crown Victoria was commissioned in millions by the federal government as well as many taxi companies to be used for those purposes, a taxi as well as police interceptors. Now, when it comes to using taxpayer money, you know that the government is going to put a gun to Ford's head and be like, look, make these as reliable as possible. We don't want you to kind of gyp us and make a really unreliable car that constantly goes into the shop. So Ford realized they had to do just that. They had to build a very reliable police car that isn't going to constantly be in service because it needs to be out there serving the people. And the Crown Victoria was a very bulletproof platform, both figuratively and literally, as police officers sometimes even hid behind their cars during shootouts. So the Crown Victoria's engine, the modular V8, would become one of Ford's most popular engines to ever be made, so popular that it would find its way into the Ford Mustang GT, and even modified variants of it found its way. First, early Koenigsegg's. That's right, early hypercars used a freaking modified Crown Victoria engine. And with these new prices, it's heart-wrenching for people who originally wanted the car, because teenagers, especially looking for their first car, back when the car was $500, they could literally decide between, oh, do I want the new console this year or do I want a literal car? And most of them would obviously choose the car. And there are millions of Crown Victorias. I don't think the new price for it is that well justified, since a lot of people kind of just bought into it now for hype because herder, every YouTuber is talking about how great it is, and some of them are as expensive as $7,000 to even $11,000. Avoid those examples. Beat people down. I think it's ridiculous when they start getting that expensive. Even for $3,800, I would still say it's a great car, but it's starting to get competitive, especially for the $7,000 examples. There's a lot of other cars you can find in that price range that will also go to 300,000 miles. Given they won't have the power of a V8, a lot of people, especially non-car people who bought this car, actually did not like its V8. For them, they just bought it because they wanted a $500 car that could start and go. The gas mileage was the worst enemy and was oftentimes seen as the car's only weakness. They're only willing to put up with it because it had a very cheap buy-in price. And now that it no longer has that cheap buy-in price, the car is no longer seen as ultimately worth it. The next car on this list is the Nissan 240SX. This car not only suffered from YouTubers inflating it, but for the longest time it was already on the path to inflation due to popular usage in Japanese drift scenarios. The car suffers from something known as a drift tax. Now, the drift tax is not a literal tax applied by the federal government, rather it's an invisible amount that's been applied by fellow car guys. So whenever they sell this car, it's like kind of a understanding of, oh, you know where this car is famous, you know what it's used for. So because of that, it carries that value with it. And that drift tax over the years has only been increasing as more and more hype has been built around this car, as now YouTubers, a massive form of media, has exposed a lot of people building this car into amazing drift cars, and now everyone and their mother wants to do the exact same thing. Its price is also being double spearheaded because not only does it suffer from drift tax, it also has the collectors getting boners over it. Personally, you guys know my stance about the idea of collecting cars and letting them collect dust in garages. I don't like it. And unfortunately, these stock Nissan 240SXs are the most expensive right now, with some examples going for $19,000. If you're okay to having a modified one, they will go for around $10,000. But this is all a long shot from their previous, for as low as $3,000, and it was $7,000 was kind of the cap back then. Now the numbers have moved all the way up to $7,000 as the low end to as high as $19,000, with the cap, with the middle kind of being around 12 grand. And I think that's ridiculous. And the reason the price disparity is that large for such an old, antiquated car is because, again, collectors are overvaluing the bone stock ones, and car guys, we're okay with having a lightly modified one. The over modified Ricer ones, you still may find some of those under 10 grand. Good luck hunting for those. You're essentially working with someone else's homework at that point. That's why for the longest time, car guys like buying stock cars and then modifying it to our own taste. That way we don't have to buy a modified car, reverse what's been done to it and return it to stock, only to then build it up again to what we wanted. So it's like a double expenditure. But with how ridiculously expensive the stock ones are getting, it's kind of untouchable by car guys. Really, the only people who really want to buy those, if you really are okay with spending 19 grand on a bone stock example as a car guy, sure. But let's be real, the only people who are buying these cars for those prices, bone stock, they're collectors. They're just gonna kind of put this in a garage somewhere or put them in a museum somewhere, slap a little sign on it that says, "This was once a really popular drift car," blah, blah, blah. And that breaks my heart. I'm just gonna admit it, it's gonna finally move out of your first car range. This used to be a car that teenagers would actually buy as their first car and start their modding journey with. I've gotta say, that's not gonna be the case. It's gonna be a car that you really have to save up for and actually love. You can still get as your first car, but now you gotta really want it, because by the time we're talking about 10 to 19 grand, there are a lot of other cars that I'm sure will entice people who are looking for a car to start their modding journey with. The next car in this list is the Chevrolet SS, also known as the Holden Commodore VF in Australia. The Chevrolet SS was extremely underappreciated at its launch and unfortunately carried that underappreciation all the way to the discontinuation of its production. It was only till it was no longer produced did a whole bunch of YouTubers draw hype towards it. Doug Demuro, myself included, regular car reviews where everyone was like, we slept on this. We slept on this sleeper sedan because it was a great sports sedan for the price. The car was formerly found for around $25,000 and featured an LS3 Corvette engine. The car now sits today at around $32,000 average, and I would dare say this is the only car on the list that I still think is actually worth its current price. If you do want to buy one to this day, it is still very fair. Whereas the other two cars at the beginning of this list I thought were kind of getting too overpriced and a bit ridiculous, I still think the Chevy SS hasn't gone to that tier yet. If they start getting around 38, 40,000-ish, that's when I'd kind of just say, okay, you guys are getting out of your mind, tone it back down a little. But for $32,000, I would still say it's a great car. If you got one while it's $25,000, woo, you got a really good deal. You got a really good car there. Back when I made a video on it, the car was worth around $25,000, and the reason I was updated to its new price was a lot of people kept spamming in the comments, "Oh, you're so wrong. Well, it's not even worth that cheap anymore." And I'm like, if you ever criticize a video, make sure to look at when it was made, because things that are made in the past aren't necessarily going to be right in the future. Just a future side note of that. Anyways, moving on to the next car, the Lamborghini Gallardo. So this is definitely a more exquisite car compared to their entries on this list, but nonetheless an important car, because whereas something like a 240 or Crown Victoria used to be people's first car in general, the Lamborghini Gallardo was some people's first supercar or introduction into the supercar world, and that has only been worsened by the existence of YouTubers, since every YouTuber and their hooker decided to buy Lamborghini Gallardos. The Lamborghini Gallardo was originally $70,000, with some examples going as low as $60,000, but those ones had a lot of questionable histories. But 70 grand for a decently on the higher end of mileage for a Lamborghini, but still very drivable, was a great price. I gotta agree from all fronts, that's a great price for this car. But news spread so that this car's value also got double spearheaded. Aside from YouTubers building hype around this car, giving it, I guess, a YouTuber tax, the car also was no longer the most produced Lamborghini anymore. So one of this car's bad stigmas was it used to be called the poor man's Lamborghini because it was the most produced Lamborghini, but the Lamborghini Huracan is now the most produced Lamborghini, and thus the one that people joke about being the new poor man's Lamborghini. And now that people kind of took their rose-tinted goggles off, looked back at the Lamborghini Gallardo and said, wow, we were a bit harsh to this car. It was actually a great car. And admittedly, I was one of those people, because looking back at the Gallardo, it's a great car. It's actually really sexy, and its styling actually aged very well in my opinion. probably not 20, 30 grand well, because the car can now be found for around 90 to 100 grand is its average range. Some examples like the Superleggeras will go for 120, even 138 grand, which is basically a Murcielago at that point. The point I'm trying to make is if you're someone who grew up as a Lamborghini fan all your life, it's going to be a lot harder for you to buy your first Lamborghini now. Who knows, maybe 10 years from now, the Gallardos might be more expensive than a Huracan, so you might actually have an easier time buying a Huracan. And in my opinion, I would probably still rather have the Gallardo because I'm a weirdo, but I know a lot of people would actually want the Huracan because it has dual clutch, blah blah, it's more advanced, yeah. Oh, by the way, it's pronounced Gallardo, don't fight me, it's not called Galardo, please stop calling it that. Anyways, on to the next car in this entry. So the final car on this list was a very recent appreciation, and I imagine this inflation won't last very long knowing the type of car it is. It's one I'm very personally close to because, well, you guessed it, it's a Corvette. The Corvette C5, C6, and C7 Z06 models specifically have gone up in value recently. Doug Demuro recently made a video about the C5 Z06 being a great bargain, and to be fair, the C6 Z06 and the C7 Z06 are known in the same right. The C5 Z06 formerly could be had for as low as $17,000. Now they're $25,000. That's a whole $8 grand there. You could actually find really good $17,000 models of these because regular C5s they're in the 10 grand price range. And in my opinion, I think it was logical because if the regular model is 10 grand, it makes sense that you get a 7 grand markup for the Z06 model, but now it's like 25 grand, so I'm just like, whoa, I'd rather just get a stock C5 for 10 grand, just modify the crap out of it with the other 15 grand, like let's be real here, but some people like the Z06 badging and are willing to pay that. C6 Z06 suffered from something similar, used to be formerly found for around 25 grand, and this was the time I was looking at the car when I first started YouTube, so around 2016 to 17, I was in the market for one. They're around 25, 28,000, and I looked at them again recently because I was like, hell, they must be even cheaper. Nah, they got more expensive. And finally, my own very personal car, the C7 Z06. I bought mine for around 62 grand for just 2k miles. It was also a demo car. At the time I was looking at them, for 10k to 20k miles, you could find these cars anywhere from 57, 59 grand. And I was really just going above and beyond to get a really low mileage one for 62 grand. Now they're around 65 or 70 grand because everyone's like, oh my gosh, they're the last front engine Corvette, quickly everyone buy them. Personally, at the end of the day, and me being a Corvette owner, I know this, Corvette prices do fluctuate every now and then for funny little reasons like this, and especially with the advent of the internet and people like Doug Demuro dropping big old millions of view videos, it will definitely, be shared across Corvette forums, get all the boomers riled up, and the prices will they're not as good with the internet as we are, so they get really easily stirred. And Corvette buying and selling is one of the biggest nightmares. If you watch that VinWiki video, bless that man, he worded it perfectly. Corvette buying and selling is one of the weirdest things in the world. In my opinion, the prices are they're not going to keep going up. Let's be real. They make tens of thousands of Corvettes. There are plenty of Corvettes on the road, and that's going to be my finishing note for this video. Other than that, thank you guys for watching this video, and I hope you guys had some fun with this list. Definitely suggest some cars that you think have inflated way too much over the past few years in the comments below. Other than that, see y'all next time. Blade Angel out.